Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here despite a little issue of time. We normally do it 4:30 to 5, but because of the Maghrib, we wanted to do it at 4. And of course, we didn't want things to go on Zoom, because it's always nice to be here, do some networking, and interact also with the chief guest. So, ladies and gentlemen, we commence, I call the meeting to order, and I would request the member of our NCEC, Mr. Shehzad Sabir, to recite a few verses from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah. Thank you, Sayyad. I will request our guests to come, please come in the front. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have the honor of having as our chief guest and speaker, Mr. Yaseen Anwar, who is well known, not only by the banking community, but also by the businessmen. He is the former governor of the State Bank of Pakistan. And, we have seen that our, whoever is our governor or after retirement, he or she, during that tenure and after the tenure, they are much in demand, for their, all over the world for their knowledge, their information that they provide, the ideas that they create and generate. And this, I think, is a testimony to the, among others, the banking community of Pakistan, our bankers. And we have quite a few bankers also here. I, of course, had the privilege to know him since he took over, when he took over as governor. But one thing that is, which I would like to say is that he was always accessible. We sometimes see that when you become the governor of a state bank, then it's difficult to get in touch with you. And if you go through the bureaucracy there, they ask a million questions why you want to even talk to the governor. But he was a different governor, And I remember, I can quote two examples. One, I thought he must be either sitting in his office or must be at his home. And I called him around 10, I think 9 or 10 in the night, And I found out that I woke him up because he was in Singapore. But he picked up the phone. I said, I'm in Singapore. The second time I again called him, and he said, do you mind if I call you back in 10, 15 minutes because I'm standing in the immigration line in Istanbul. And I'll call you once I clear the customs and so, that's why our friendship also grew, over the years. Then he got lost, I think, was in Singapore, and he was very much in demand in China and others. So, but he's back in Karachi, and I requested our NCEC that, I would like to invite Mr. Yaseen Anwar to speak to us, and they all agreed. And because everybody knows him, and we know his experience and his knowledge and his intelligence. So without further ado, I would now call upon my president, Mr. Aziz Mehman, to give his welcome address, introduce the chief guest, and also any house rules that he has with him. Mr. Aziz Mehman.
Thank you, Majid. Thank you. We have with us today our two former presidents, Mr. Qadir Jafar and Mr. Behram Awari, who also was here. I think he stepped out because it is his property, so he keeps on coming and going in and out. And we are privileged to have with us Mr. Sirajuddin Aziz, whose name doesn't need any introduction. My friends, I'm privileged to welcome a distinguished economic personality in today's session of English-speaking Union of Pakistan. Mr. Yaseen Anwar has distinguished himself by his astute perceptions about economic matters, and his opinions are valued internationally. Being aware of the efforts of ESUP to provide its platform to outstanding personalities, Mr. Anwar has obliged us by agreeing to address the ESUP today and to enlighten us with his views. This has been our tradition to briefly introduce our honored guest, and at the outset, I may mention that Mr. Anwar very distinctly served as Governor, State Bank of Pakistan for 7 years, and during his tenure, he negotiated and signed country's first currency swap agreement with China. This was a big achievement. I think he deserves a round of applause for that. And with Turkey in 2012, becoming only the 7th central bank to sign an agency agreement with the People's Bank of China to invest in local government bonds. As governor of the central bank, he served on the bank for the International Settlement, Financial Stability Board, and on the Board of Governors of International Monetary Fund. Prior to central bank, Mr. Anwar worked in New York, London, Paris, and Egypt with JP Morgan, Chase, Bank of America, and Merrill Lynch in various senior capacities. He is a graduate of Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Mr. Anwar possesses rich and exceptional experience of economic matters, spanning more than 40 years. Mr. Yaseen Anwar is member of International Monetary Institute International Board, China, and served on the advisory board of the Official Monetary and Financial Institution Forum, UK, from 2014 to 2020. He was senior advisor to the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China in Singapore and is currently the founding chairman of the management consultants Yaseen Anwar and Associates. Throughout his career, Mr. Anwar has disseminated his knowledge and expertise to large audience and is widely known as an active keynote speaker on topics including the Belt Road Initiative, which is BRI, internationalization of RM, and infrastructure finance at numerous global forums in Singapore, China, Middle East, London, and USA. I may reiterate that hosting Mr. Anwar is indeed a privilege, as his point of view is based upon realistic assessments of the economic matters and may prove beneficial to the members of English-speaking Union. Mr. Yaseen will be welcome among us, and I'm sure that this session and the subsequent interaction with Mr. Yaseen Anwar will be extremely valuable and will provide substantial food for thought. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Yaseen Anwar, but before he comes, I just wanted to talk, I'll mention one thing to you. When his mother passed away, he was the governor of State Bank, and I went for condolence. She was 92, but I still recall he told me, Aziz, my mother was not on any medication. And he added, she was not even taking an aspirin. With these words, Mr. Yaseen Anwar.
Thank you very much, Aziz, for your kind words. You have an excellent memory. Some of those memorable events I don't even remember, but that's very kind of you. You were absolutely right in what you had mentioned. Majid Aziz, Kaleem, and I also must recognize my good friend, His Excellency, Mr. Qadir Jafar in the audience. Thank you for coming. First of all, I'm delighted to be here amongst friends, and the topic that I'm going to talk about today is of interest to many, but you need a crystal ball. But we'll do our best to see what we can do to come to some logical conclusion. The world today faces global uncertainty, upheavals, volatility, on a scale not witnessed in recent history. Since the global financial crisis of 2008, the global economy today is in uncharted territory that is impacting on our daily lives and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Central bankers setting economic policy have to consider all types of threats, such as technological developments, climate change, and business disruptions caused by geopolitical conflicts. But the pandemic of COVID-19 has added a completely new dimension that policymakers have never experienced. What is the state of the global economy today, and what steps can policymakers take to resuscitate the global economy back to normal growth rates? Let's step back first. I'd like to step back first and see where we were before the pandemic. For 2020, China and the United States, as the two largest economies, were expected to grow at 6% and 2% respectively. Over the past 50 years, 70% of the global wealth has been concentrated in the United States, with only 10% of the world's population. 65% of the total FX reserves in the world were held in US dollars, while RMB, the yuan, represents 10.92% weight in the STR basket of currencies as approved by the IMF in 2016, has only about 2% of current reserves. 45% of global payments, according to SWIFT, were in US dollars. Sanctions and tariffs are being used as economic weapons. End of 2019, exactly a year back, we had over $16 trillion in negative yielding European debt that would put pressure on the US economy. Britain, at the cusp of its empire in the 19th century, ruled over 24% of the global population and 26% of the world's landmass. By the end of last year, the UK was facing breakfast and even had difficulty governing itself. These facts are a few of the issues weighing on policymakers before the pandemic that provided a compelling backdrop to a possible global economic recession. But by the first half of 2020, the global economy had come to a grinding halt, with the largest economy in tatters, not seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The following economic events highlight the impact of the pandemic during the first 5 months of this year. The US stock market, that reached a peak of over 29,000, fell down 1/3 to below 20,000, wiping out trillions of dollars, a market cap not seen since the Great Depression. As of May, 40 million in the United States had lost their jobs as unemployment hit close to 20%. Currently, it's 10 million unemployed. In addition, today we have 300,000 plus who have died in the United States, the highest of any country. China's first quarter growth rate registered a negative rate of 6.8%, Although it is now on a positive trajectory, the EU was on a negative growth trajectory, with manufacturing and consumer demand down in the United States, the latter being the key driver of the economy. The Federal Reserve had only two instruments to inject liquidity that drives the markets. That was monetary policy and its balance sheet. While monetary policy had already been exhausted with near zero rates, the Fed resorted to using its balance sheet for quantitative easing. Due to the underlying strength of the US economy, fiscal measures have been aggressively used to stabilize the economy, albeit these are short-term measures. And they will have to continue using fiscal measures because monetary policy is still exhausted itself. Aside from supply chains being disrupted, global demand was significantly down. Example, 90% of global trade is conducted by shipping. More than 30% of capacity, or more than 3 million containers, had been taken out of the market. Thus, global economic recovery, as we can see, is demand dependent. But traditional fiscal and monetary policy or instruments are no longer readily available to stimulate stalled economies due to lockdowns, with the exception of China, that still has plenty of tools in its internal arsenal to pump in liquidity through its banking system. Most developing countries are plagued with both current and fiscal account deficits, as is Pakistan, and no longer have the fiscal space to stimulate their economies. Pakistan certainly doesn't have much fiscal space. They're dependent on pickup of global demand and support from multilateral institutions such as AIIB, the World Bank, ADB, etc. Due to the supply and demand disruptions, overnight, 1/2 of Saudi oil, you may remember, was taken out of the market, and the price of oil dropped to below $20. Notwithstanding, this low price was an unexpected bonus for oil importing countries, particularly those developing countries suffering from the pandemic with severe current account deficits. Pakistan benefited also, of course. However, intervention by the strong economies, mainly the United States, to alter market-driven prices led to cutting supply in order to provide a bounce back to around $50 per barrel today, much to the disadvantage of the poorer countries. The trade war between the two largest economies has not dissipated, but continues to be used as an economic weapon. Protectionism is only aggravating trade, as history has shown from the Smoot-Hawley tariff of the 1930s that led to a reduction of world trade by up to 64%. So anyone who is into trade tariffs should know that piece of information. But the current US leadership obviously did not agree with that. And incidentally, Donald Trump, who went to the same university as I did, obviously didn't take the same courses that I took, but he had graduated because he's a bit older to me. But the university does not invite him for any speeches. I wonder why. While these events I've cited do not paint a rosy picture of the global economy as it currently stands, history has also shown that saner and wise minds will prevail in navigating us out of this quagmire. The challenges are many, and as a former central banker, I would like to share my thoughts on how I see the world reshaping itself going forward. Pakistan will need to take decisive strategic policy measures to ensure sustained economic growth in the context of this global economic recovery. Given the shocks to the global economy that we are facing and will continue to face going forward, as I mentioned, it is incumbent on the central banks to ensure inclusive and sustainable growth is not stifled. We must take proactive measures to provide sorely needed capital and appropriate macroprudential regulations to stimulate growth that will spur employment and urbanization in emerging markets. There are three key areas I see shifts and themes and opportunities. They are the Belt and Road Initiative, 2, climate change, and 3rd, technology or fintech. Let me talk about these three because these are three themes that I believe the global world will follow, and we should also take cognizance of this. The first is the Belt and Road Initiative, or CPEC in the case of our own venture, because CPEC is about $60 billion, and the BRI initiative on a global basis is about $2 to $3 trillion. So CPEC fits into that. The underlying infrastructure that is at the core of its focus of CPEC and BRI. While earlier in the year uncertainty prevailed, China today has become even more attractive due to its resiliency and stability in managing COVID-19 with its hospitals and health officials in a coordinated manner. Harking back to my alma mater, you bankers have read about this, the Wharton Business School alumnus Michael Milken created what we call the junk bond business in the 1980s to enable smaller, non-rated companies to access capital. Besides triggering new opportunities for investors, this stimulated overall economic growth through new jobs and increased consumer purchasing power. Analogous to Milken's strategy, China's multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative for infrastructure financing gives access to capital to many emerging market economies that have not been able to tap international bond markets easily. These economies have never had the opportunity to attract offshore investors who require ratings dictated by their corporate board policies. The four largest recipient countries for BRI are, as I mentioned, Pakistan with about 62 billion, followed by Bangladesh, Malaysia, and the Philippines, each with over 30 billion. Infrastructure, the core of Belt and Road funding, is and has been the engine of growth for most economies. The 19th century Industrial Revolution transformed agrarian-based economies into technological and manufacturing-based ones. In the case of the United States, this shift accelerated again in the 1930s by President Franklin Roosevelt. New Deal and the expansion of the domestic transportation network that made the country the leading economy of the 20th century. The lack of quality infrastructure has hampered the economic development that many Belt and Road related countries sorely need. For example, the shortage of power in Pakistan, we all know, has impaired GDP growth rates of up to 3%. The absence of developed transportation network in the agriculture sector for refrigerated trucks for distribution of agricultural products results in a 50% loss of perishable goods. Numerous countries have already felt the benefits of new employment opportunities and improved productivity thanks to BRI projects. In 2017, the Greek port of Piraeus handled more than 4 million containers for onward distribution to Europe. Germany's Duisburg Inner Harbor has become the world's largest inland port, and more than 10,000 companies are now operating across Africa through an expanded transportation network of roads and rail. More than $60 billion of new business has been generated across a range of operations, including increased investment and tourism into Africa, new housing in Indonesia, power projects in Bangladesh, roads in Pakistan and Kazakhstan, and rising global and intra-regional trade in the ASEAN countries. Let me quickly highlight a few of BRI's attributes while I'm on that subject and successes. As I mentioned, it's a $2 trillion plus effort connecting more than 100 countries, 65% of the world's population, 1/3 of the world's GDP, and 40% of the global trade. Now here's an interesting fact. Between 1980 and 2016, the world's annual growth was 3.5%. If you strip China out of that equation, it was only 2.6%. You can get an understanding of what kind of magnitude China represents today in the global economy. ASEAN trade with China in 2018 increased by 12%, and during the first half of this year it increased by 5.7%, while decreasing with EU by approximately 60%. Look at the divergence and contrast. France and China have jointly started construction last year on the 3,200 megawatt Hinkley nuclear power plant in the UK. In 2017, Dubai increased its non-oil bilateral trade with China to $48 billion. Now, 3,400 Chinese companies are operating and registered in Dubai. There are over 500 operating and registered in Pakistan. As of 2019, over 100 countries and international organizations had signed cooperation agreements with China. Another interesting point, today China represents the #1 export partner for more than 75 countries compared to only 2 countries 20 years back. Given the backdrop of what I have outlined in terms of global economic uncertainty, with BRI providing the necessary resources to maintain positive growth trajectories, policymakers still need to initiate measures to cushion fragile economies from exogenous shocks and learn from the past. The 2008 global financial crisis, we all know, shook our trust in the international monetary system as major financial institutions collapsed. We all know about it, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and so forth. And the world witnessed a deep recession in the United States and an existential debt crisis in Europe with negative interest rates. The development of the corporate debt market in emerging markets should be priority, given this process of intermediation in some countries is focused through commercial banks, as in the case in Pakistan. Commercial banks have a captive audience with all the major multinational companies and manufacturing companies here. The global financial crisis highlighted the role private debt markets can play in ensuring the flow of credit in the real sector. One of the reasons the recovery in the United States was better than in the EU was due to the better developed private bond markets that the United States have, the depth and breadth of the markets. The world is no longer predictable, as we know. The future of public and private sector asset management will depend on prudent and sustainable investment in uncertain times. BRI and its access to capital will provide opportunities for suitable long-term investors. The uncertainty and disruption of supply chains amid the pandemic and trade wars has led to significant development towards regional integration and increased intra-regional, and emphasize intra-regional trade that will restore growth rates for those regional economies. And I'll emphasize intra-regional because I'll touch on it again. Protectionism, trade wars, as I mentioned, was targeting China's supply chains, and the weaponizing of economic instruments will precipitate diversification of supply chains and retain focus on lowering unit production costs. Aside from BRI, the most notable development last month was the ASEAN leaders launching the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership, acronym RCEP, that will add further impetus to the region. This 15-member ASEAN initiative has enormous potential to lift each of their own economies and at the same time establish a credible framework for higher growth in the region. It offers opportunities in the form of a huge market of $25 trillion and a population of over $2.3 billion. The combined GDP of this region alone is greater than that of the EU and NAFTA. Intra-regional trade with ASEAN currently is only 24%, as compared to 65% of EU and NAFTA. This needs correction, and going forward, I believe with RCEP, this correction will take place, and you can see how I see intra-regional trade in ASEAN going upward mobility. As for the benefits of intra-regional trade going forward, Pakistan can play a pivotal role, but we have not initiated that step. I was invited last year in November for the Margala dialogue that was held in Islamabad to talk about this. And I mentioned at the time that this is an area where Pakistan can play a pivotal role with the Central Asian republics. Central Asian republics and Pakistan and South Asia are the least integrated region in the world. That gives you an idea about the potential. The second area of increasing importance is tied to climate change. That is now an existential challenge of our time and a key component of BRI's emphasis and priority. Its importance has become even more elevated with COVID-19, as it has sensitized the world to how vulnerable we are to the forces of nature. An important step undertaken was evident on the development, issuance, and usage of the Belt and Road Interbank Regulatory Cooperation Bonds. I'll refer to them as BRBR, proceeds of which are applied by the issuer to finance eligible green assets along the Belt and Road countries and regions. The assets being financed comprise eligible green asset categories and qualify under the Center for International Research, CICERO, established by the United Nations. In fact, in April 2019, last year in Beijing, and I attended that forum, that summit that was held by Xi Jinping, I was asked to speak on the sidelines of the roundtable with, as a keynote speaker, along with the governor of the Central Bank of China. The eligible green asset categories are critical to this climate change. In fact, as I mentioned, in April 2019, ICBC Singapore launched a $2.2 billion multi-currency green bond under the BRBR mechanism, the purpose of which is to develop the role of debt capital markets to better allocate resources to support BRI infrastructure projects. Again, access to capital via BRI to support infrastructure as the core engine of growth. This also fits in well with Green Investment Principles, GIP, launched in 2018 by the UK and China governments as a finance-first initiative to green the Belt and Road. The infrastructure investment under BRI will have a significant impact on the implementation of the Paris Agreement and UN Sustainable Goals. The aim of GIP is to ensure that environmental friendliness, climate resilience, and social inclusiveness are built into new investment projects in BRI. Let me highlight how important this priority is being taken. The following are noteworthy. First, a positive development, as I mentioned, the pandemic, is that carbon emissions for the period January to June, the first half of this year, were down by 17%. BlackRock, the largest asset manager, announced this year it has made sustainable investing a cornerstone of its long-term objectives and currently has over $90 billion in ETFs, exchange-traded funds, that comply with ESG standards. They've recently established an asset manager joint venture in China also. Recently, Temasek, which is one of the largest sovereign wealth funds of Singapore, took a 3.9% stake in BlackRock in support of sustainable investing. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, which is the equivalent of our central bank, has established an office to promote ESG standards in its banking sector and is taking a leading role in this. The governor of the Central Bank of Singapore is in constant touch with me, and we're good friends, and I see the progress they're making. They're way ahead of where we should be. HSBC, a well-known bank globally, recently announced a joint venture to form the world's largest natural capital manager, targeting $3 billion. The joint venture will be the first large-scale venture to mainstream natural capital as an asset class. And here's an important signal. In September, just a few months back, General Electric, a major international firm, announced it was exiting the coal-fired power plant business. Very important signal. I know we are one of the largest coal producers in the world, but this is a very strong signal for those in the power business. As you can see, climate control has sensitized the world where financial risks need to be carefully assessed in the financial sector. Accounting firms can play an important role in assessing and providing expertise to financial institutions on how to adopt sound methodologies and tools to identify environmental risks to their loan portfolios and review the audit reports accordingly. Most central banks are beginning to review and adopt such risk mitigant measures with an emphasis on disclosure. And a byproduct of disclosure, of course, is that we'll have more data. And data, of course, is essential for us to make sound and prudent decisions. An important note I should add is that as China announced carbon neutrality by 2060, it translates into trillions of dollars of new investment opportunities for green finance in both China and along the Belt and Road. As China's pledge will encourage other developing countries to come up with more ambitious goals with NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which is the heart of the Paris Agreement. For example, a recent study by GIP, that's Green Investment Principles, for one province in China found that green investments between now and 2030 are estimated to exceed 13 trillion RMB, which is approximately $2 trillion. And the magnitude for all over China will amount to hundreds of trillions of dollars. Against this background, and going forward, GIP will be reaching out and provide better support to other developing countries along the Belt and Road in terms of green and sustainable development by establishing regional offices and chapters. These steps will be announced by January 2021, which is next month, and Pakistan will need to be prepared. I'm not at liberty to talk about this in detail as to what the game plan is in that, what the timelines is, but I've given you a good hint. By January, there will be some announcement made by UK and China on these regional chapters for green investment principles. It all dovetails into the Paris Agreement, and Pakistan will need to comply and must, otherwise we will not be part of the comedy of nations in the international banking arena. Even in wealth management, and notwithstanding COVID-19, Asia is projected to have the strongest growth in wealth management over the next 5 years. Much of this wealth will be channeled to ESG investments. A UBS study estimates that close to 40% of family offices plan to allocate most of their portfolio sustainably in 5 years' time. Studies indicate an estimated $15 trillion is expected to change hands to the next generation by 2030. Another opportunity for accounting firms to explore. Aside from BRI and climate change, the third area that will change the landscape of the globe will be technology, or fintech. Due to lockdowns, the use of online orders for shopping or food has been the backbone of survival for those who have had access to technology. We all have experienced this in Pakistan as well. Adapting to digital banking and operating from home has elevated corporate executives on how to manage during severe business disruptions. And I'm sure we've learned a great deal. I know I have a bit of technology. Various studies have shown that 1.7 billion people globally are excluded from accessing basic financial services, i.e. payments. 6.5% are excluded in the United States alone. Studies by ADB, Asian Development Bank, have shown 85% of the adult population in South Asia does not have access to basic financial services. Small businesses have been hit hard, and fintech companies will fill up this space more and more. Alibaba's, Ant Financial, Telenor, and other companies have invested heavily in digital payments and e-commerce. Digital technologies are influencing corporate finance officers for improving cash management for their offices worldwide. Getting a better handle on cash on hand and the returns are essential for avoiding government handouts. Finance professionals also believe cybersecurity risks are among the most challenging risks to manage today. Technological innovation in the payment space is good for consumers, and central banks must keep pace with the risk landscape without compromising financial inclusion. To manage it, they must devote attention first to their domestic markets and establish appropriate regulations and national payments councils that many emerging markets do not have. The challenges in regulating cryptocurrency and other similar payments need to be carefully assessed before we are forced to confront unintended consequences. Cash in circulation has been regulated in a controlled environment by central banks. Digital currencies, meanwhile, may not necessarily be completely under the control of central banks. National payments councils that include all stakeholders, aside from the central banks, need to be all-encompassing in assessing the inherent risks with clear regulations before they launch cryptocurrencies and potentially weaken our trust in the international monetary system again. I've highlighted the three themes and areas that are most important going forward. In conclusion, in a world of uncertainty and the impact of global developments, including COVID-19, economic policymakers will face many challenging and unprecedented headwinds. I've highlighted, as I mentioned, the three core areas of themes, BRI, climate change, and fintech, with sustainable finance as the underlying feature. These themes will bring value to the financial industry, economy, and the world as a whole. We must ensure policymakers consider all these issues and work in a collective and coordinated manner towards global growth in a multipolar world that uniformly benefits the entire planet. I've thrown out a lot of numbers, I've thrown a lot of information, but let me say I once again wish to thank the ESU for giving me the opportunity of addressing such a prestigious and talented audience. And I hope I haven't bored you too much, because I know you're very educated and the name itself is synonymous to English-speaking union for that. After this talk, I hope you can walk away with even one small piece of information that you were unaware of before, and I'll be happy with that. I'll be glad to field questions as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Anwar. It seems with Yaseen Saab, it seems with what is going to happen in the world and where Pakistan stands, it seems like it's like a piece of Pakistan, like a piece of apparel dangling on a hanger in a closet, you know. Until the door is open, I don't think we'll be moving, you know. We'll be more in a reactionary mode rather than being in a proactive mode, you know. Anyway, we move further. Mr. Anwar, is that we have a Q&A session that will be moderated by the President. The first opportunity is to the members. You are requested to please also identify yourself, and we'll appreciate questions more than statements. Thank you. Mr. Mehman?
Yes, sir. Anyone who wants to ask any question? जी सर आप बोल नहीं नहीं कभी
एक सेकंड जलाल
नहीं
Ji, Assalamu alaikum ji. Yaseen, thank you very much. It was not only an eye-opener, but a very informative, brief but detailed information that is something which has really impressed me. You were saying something about Paris Agreement. I know that the US has just withdrawn themselves from Paris Agreement last year. Do you have, what impact do you see them being withdrawn from that particular?
Can you hear me? Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Valid question. Well, as I mentioned, I alluded to in my speech that the current outgoing president has exited from the Paris Agreement. Mistake. As you have heard, these are very important steps that we all must take and will continue. However, as I mentioned also, saner and wiser minds will prevail. The new incoming president has recognized this is a very vital area, and a testimony to the importance of this climate change is the person he has appointed as the climate czar, John Kerry. As you know, he was the former State Department official and former presidential candidate. He has been designated as the person to lead the charge for the United States, restoring its own reputation as participant in the climate change. This will take a little time, in my view, because the U.S. has set itself back years by the action it took by withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, because in that meantime, other countries have moved forward. As I mentioned, even ESUP has been set with climate change as part of its agreement. And other regional bilateral agreements have incorporated climate change. So U.S. is behind, they have to play catch up. And that's why he has been appointed. So I think the U.S. will play a role, albeit I think other countries have taken a leading role. China has taken a major leading role in the examples I've cited. They've just got the massive resources that has given them a window of opportunities by that mistake that the U.S. made. That gap has been filled up by China, and it's going to take a long time for the U.S. to restore it.
The next question is from Mr. Naeem Faruqi. Mike?
Yeah, name.
Assalamu alaikum, Governor Sahab. My name is Naeem Faruqi and I am a retired banker now. I must congratulate you on the summary that you have given us, not just on the world, but even for the Pakistan's economy. What I would like to focus on is the state of economy in Pakistan. Of course, the government is very aggressively looking at so many things, exporting this, that, and the other. But I think one major thing that they need to do is to concentrate on food security. Now, that is one thing which I think they are not taking it very seriously. Of course, they have determined certain areas where they are going to be helping the farmers and all. But they are only doing that for run-of-the-mill items like tractors and tube wells, etc. There are so many things that can be done to improve the yield as well as, be able to export the produce. I understand that there are at least 2 or 3 countries who are interested in buying our lands on lease. Now, for example, if the government can subsidize or even give them free of cost land levelers, it's a very simple thing. Land levelers which actually take care of water distribution over a land. The way that we go about right now is basically, just use the tractor and the tube well and the irrigation system that we have. We are not even concentrating on drip irrigation and so on. So what do you think about this, the solution for this?
Being a seasoned banker, I should be asking that question to you. Well, let me see if I understand the question properly. You mentioned about the Pakistan economy, and the areas that you're concerned with is the agricultural sector, which has not been optimally extracted in its value. Okay. You're absolutely correct. First of all, there are two parts. Let me talk about the Pakistan economy, because I think you've got people who are much more expert than I am on the Pakistan economy in this room as well as in Islamabad. So I don't want to steal their thunder, and they'll say that I don't know what I'm talking about. So on the Pakistan economy, I always said, when I was at the State Bank, and I still say it today, is you need three things to fix the economy. One is revenue, balance of payments, and private sector credit. You fix the first one, the others will fall into place. Unfortunately, our history has shown our revenue, tax to GDP ratio is, is now about to 9%. It's a drop from 11 to 9% currently. So this is one of the lowest levels you can find in the world. We should be in the upper teens. So we have not fixed this particular problem yet. Now, getting back to your agriculture point, agriculture is a very vital part of this economy. 22% of our GDP, 45% of our workforce, as you know. And I mentioned briefly the kind of perishable products that are not being utilized because we don't have the refrigerated truck and the supply chain, the mobility of transporting those to appropriate areas where they could be exported. I remember once I said, well before they started doing this, I mentioned something and people thought I was foolish. In some IMF meetings in Washington, our group went, and I said how agricultural dairy products, we're the 5th largest milk producer in the world, and our cows are yielding this amount as opposed to United States and Australian cows. And someone put in the paper that I didn't know what I was talking about, and that he was talking only about cows and bhansas. Okay? Well, there was a reason why I was talking about it. Today, what is happening? You've got imported cows from Australia and elsewhere, and we're manufacturing dairy products that are comparable to the Europeans in terms of quality standards. You know who the companies are. They're doing a great deal. Day Fresh milk, which you find is Australian cows, automated. So the agricultural sector has not been tapped properly, and I hesitate to mention something that is a little politically sensitive, but it goes back during my time. I did negotiated a particular agreement with the Chinese authorities to play a role in the Agricultural Development Bank because we needed that kind of strategic partner, not in terms of taking over the bank, but a strategic partner in management to elevate the agricultural sector. But it wasn't the State Bank's job. I negotiated and they agreed. I left it with the authorities in Islamabad. It never got followed up. So unfortunately, we need follow-up. Now, as far as I can't be specific about the areas you mentioned, tube wells and all, because frankly, I'm not as knowledgeable on it. I'll be first to admit my shortcomings in that. But the agricultural sector, we have to be careful how the demographics change over years ahead with CPEC. CPEC initially was flawed in my view, and I said it openly. It needed to be rechanneled through Balochistan and disenfranchised populations which were not recognized at the time. It was going through Lahore, mostly. And Lahore is already bursting at its seams with urbanization. Urbanization in Pakistan is about 35%. In the ASEAN countries is about 45%. International standard is about 55 to 60%. Singapore, of course, is close to a much higher as a perfect place than other cities as well. But this pattern of industrialization under CPEC and the urbanization that's going to take place towards cities like Lahore cannot cope with it. You have migration of these agricultural areas who look for job opportunities. Do we have the educational system? Do we have the sanitary system, the sewage system? What is the outcome of these shortcomings in these cities? This has been poor planning. Outcome is poverty. And what is the outgrowth of poverty? Crime. Do we want that in the future? We need to plan these carefully so that the agricultural sector attracts those employees or these workers to remain there and take action and take ownership. But you mentioned about the land. There's a problem with that too, at least I experienced, is that some of this land is very controversial in terms of provinces. Take the railways. It's plagued with problems. Why? Because how can you privatize that when you got railway properties in different provinces? Punjab has its own rules and regulations on its land, and Sindh has its own, etc., etc. Same thing with our foreclosure laws for real estate. You know, our real estate is less than 1% of our GDP. United States is 65%. Mortgage financing, 65% of GDP. UK is 105%. So this has been lacking. Why? Part of the reason is the foreclosure laws, in that you can't perfect a security interest, and you as a banker know this, how it gets stuck in the courts. So I haven't answered your question the way you would like me to on the agricultural specific sector, but I can only give you a macro picture of that.
Thank you. Anis, Kadir Bhai and then Anis Yunus would ask the last question. Kadir Bhai?
Yeah.
And then Anis Yunus.
It's not.
First of all,
I
I must welcome you back to Pakistan.
Thank you. Physically I was out, but my heart and mentally I was still here.
I think we all welcome you, and I'm very happy to see that you have decided to tie up all your affairs abroad and come back to Pakistan. And I wish you good luck. And with what you have said today, it's really amazing. I think it's an eye-opener to all our friends here today as to the potential Pakistan has. We all need to seek your advice and guidance. And I feel that there is much more in Pakistan than anywhere else in the world. We are wasting our time going abroad. Maybe you have not wasted, at least you have learnt and gained information and experience which you have brought back. So thank you very much. I would also like to request you that you need to establish a consultancy firm, which I think you are doing already, and advise our Pakistani friends what industries they should set up here. And with China, you mentioned that the Chinese have 4,000 companies outside. And why only 40 or so you mentioned in Pakistan? Why can't we get more? What is lacking in Pakistan compared to UAE and other countries? Maybe if you could guide us, we could provide them all assistance, facilities, I'm sure which is available in Pakistan. More is available than anywhere else in the Far East, Malaysia, Singapore. So Pakistan is a much better country. So what is lacking in us? What are we not doing properly to get the Chinese? Please guide us.
Thank you, Your Excellency. First of all, very kind of you to have said some of those words, and coming from you, I consider it as an honor. Pakistan does have huge potential, and we have the opportunity to become one of the leading nations economically, as we were, and South Korea used our own plan in the early 60s to elevate itself as one of the leading economies. We unfortunately lost some way. Somewhere around the track we missed the road. And there are many knowledgeable people here in Pakistan, and I don't feel that I have any more knowledgeable expertise in Pakistan than the others do. The only thing that you did point out that I did bring back some expertise from Asia, which for the future is the engine of growth, is the growth areas. That's where the growth will be for the future, Asia, and driven by China and some of the items I mentioned. Europe, forget it. United States, it will take a long time. It's going to take a long time for the fiscal stimulus to work itself out. The next year's zero interest rates will stay there for the next couple of years. So what we need to do is get our own house in order. Unfortunately, we've got an advantage of 1,000-mile longitude north and south geography, which connects the sea and up north to the Central Asian republics and China. This is a great advantage, which others, our adversaries, don't like. And you know that the events took place in the 2010, 11, and 12. There was instability internally, and Afghanistan situation has not been helping us. So the domestic security issue has always plagued us. And I highlighted that, not about the security. but the opportunity to access capital. We have not had the opportunity to access capital until now, which does not require the ratings that we need from China. That's why our adversaries are upset. They talk about leveraged debt. Well, what happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s with the Western nations? They provided a similar kind of support over 25-year soft loans in local currency also. The PL 480s, GSM 102 under USDA, Exim Bank support. I used to manage the Global Export Finance Group for Bank of America in the late 80s and 90s. So I saw this happening in different countries. There's no difference here. So I always respond back to a question that was asked once in Singapore and in a Zoom call that I had here. Pakistan is going to be hurting. I said, well, if you provide the same kind of capital as China is doing under the Belt Road Initiative, Pakistan will have fair tenders. So be it. Put your money where your mouth is. Don't criticize if you are not providing the capital. And I said this in a forum, and it was interesting. It was in the Dawn newspaper also, that article. And a week later, Mr. Bomer, from head of aid of US, came to visit. And he instantly informed the finance ministry, it was in the paper, so I'm not talking about anything secret, said, we've got $2 billion allocated for Central Asian republics. He's going to go back and see if he can include Pakistan into that $2 billion too. Interesting. 1 week after I said what I said, it was in the papers. And this was after State Department was criticizing. No criticism has come forward after that. That's the answer we have to give. Put your money where your mouth is. Give equal amount of terms and capital, and Pakistan will give equality to the United States, Europe, whoever. That's what we need to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Anis Yunus doesn't have a question. He has a comment. So please go ahead and give some advice, what you want to give on how to live longer.
Sir, I know the subject that you have elaborated
Take a little
upon.
closer.
The subject you have elaborated upon is very, important, and you have done a very good job. But Aziz actually diverted my attention from the very beginning when he mentioned about your mom's, age and how she refrained from medicine. That's, I think, in the Asian part of the world, we, use the very effective homemade remedies and many other local things. And we try to refrain from medicines, like from pharma side, so which is quite understandable. But, the Americans have a different point of view. And when I was living there in the US for a few years, I heard this story, and I must share this with you. There was a 7-year-old boy sitting under the tree on a very, nice afternoon, and he started eating a candy bar. And he ate one, he did second, he did third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. And a guy of someone in my age group or in my, height came over to him and he said, son, I've been watching you. And you have been eating one candy bar after the other. If you put up like this, you can have a heart attack, diabetes, and many other ailments. So this young boy, 7-year-old Johnny, he looks up at him and he says, my grandpa is 85 years old. So the gentleman goes, and does he eat 7 candy bars in a row? He said, no, but he minds his own business. So I think that's what we need here as well, in general.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Anis. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have a presentation of a memento. At the same time, I would request Shehzad, please join us.
Member of NCC.
And he is, of course, the member of the NCC. उस तरफ इधर से आ जाओ, लेकिन उधर thank you. And now I'd request Vice President Kaleem Faruqi to propose a vote of thanks. Kaleem.
Governor Sahib, it was a pleasure to see you back in Karachi. I've been meeting him in different continents. He was based in Singapore for a long while. And the good thing that we found was there was this gentleman representing Pakistan as the governor. And then going towards the east, most of them have been going towards the west, joining IMF, World Bank, you name it. And he was with the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. And he got the opportunity of going and meeting, which is now perhaps the power in the East. What I was going to ask him, I didn't get a chance, is basically the paradigm shift that is taking place universally, and especially in our region, and the role that China is playing, and where does Pakistan stand? It will be a long thing to ask for, but we are glad to see you back, sir. Like Mr. Jafar said, he is into consultancy. I hope our government consults him, the experience that he has. And unfortunately, the shift of time and the venue at the moment did not get the required number. But the thing will be reported tomorrow, inshallah, in dawn. It was a very extensive speech, sir. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kaleem. In the end, I thank our members and guests, and of course, Mr. Yaseen Anwar for taking the time out. One thing that he mentioned was RCEP, and that's a big subject that we might have to invite him again to just talk on RCEP and other initiatives. So, ladies and gentlemen, with this, I announce the end of this and we close the business. Thank you.